Well, that's just the bigger picture is agendas, just it seems like they want And they, we can talk about who the day is but want to stop him no matter what. But you mentioned weaponizing, which brings me to my next point. I want to talk about the US dollar because you make a very strong case when you say this is the reddest of the reddest lines for you. And I don't, and then I got press attention. But I don't think people spoke about it enough. And it's Mike Johnson's, floating around the idea that we need to seize Russian treasuries' assets to fund Ukraine. Now talk to him about why this is such a dangerous idea.
Sure. Let's go back just to the years before the war in Ukraine. So it started at the end of February 2022. Well, for, 30, 40 years since the end of the Cold War or longer, the Russian central bank had held a portion of their reserves in US Treasury securities, dollar denominated, but US Treasury securities in particular of different maturities, bills, notes, probably some bonds, mostly shorter term bills and notes. To their credit, Elvira Nabiullina, who's the head of the Central Bank of Russia, in my view, she's the only central banker in the world who knows what she's doing. She put 25% of Russia's reserves in physical gold, held in custody in Russia, in Moscow. So the point being, you can't freeze gold. I've always liked that about gold. It's not digital. It's not electronic. You can't freeze it. You can say what you want, but so that part is off limits. And it has some other types of investments. A big chunk of it, about $300 billion, which was about half their reserve position. Their reserves were about $600 billion. They had $150 billion in gold. Was in US Treasuries. Now, the last paper Treasury security was issued like in 1979. They're all digital. They're all, I call the dollar the original cryptocurrency. But they're held in custody, mostly in Belgium, but other European banks as well, other custodians, Deutsche Bank, UBS, and some in the United States, but mostly in Europe. Now, on day one of the war, within a matter of days, those treasuries were frozen. But let's define what frozen means. Frozen means you, Russia, you still own them, but you can't have them, you can't collect the interest, you can't sell them, you can't trade them. They're yours, but we're locking them up, and the US Treasury and the Fed control the ledger, so they can enforce that. They can make sure that those securities cannot be transferred. That's freezing. Now what they're talking about, and they're talking about doing this by February 24th, which happens to be the second anniversary of the start of the war. I don't know why they have to pick anniversary dates, but that's what they're talking about. They're talking about seizing them. Seizing is different. That's when you steal them. That's when you take them and say, hey, Russia, pardon me, these are not just frozen, they're ours. We're taking them. They're not yours anymore. And selling them at the market and using the $300 billion of proceeds to finance the war in Ukraine. Not only are we taking your money, but we're using it to finance your adversary in a war. Now, a little background, Biden and the White House want $61 billion of additional money for Ukraine. That has not passed. There's a lot of opposition in the House. Some opposition in the Senate. I would say if it were up to the Senate, it would pass. But the House is saying no. And what Biden did, what the White House did, they bundled $10 billion for Israel, $60 billion for Ukraine, some number, I think another $10 billion or so for maybe a little more for Taiwan, in one bill. And the idea was, even if you don't like Ukraine, you don't want to vote against Israel. So it would be a way to get everybody to vote for it. Well, the House said no. And Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, said no. And they said, first of all, we want them separated. So the House voted for Israeli aid. That already passed. It's with the Senate. But they have not voted on Ukraine. And then they said, well, if you insist on doing that, we want money for the border. And Biden said, okay, I'll take more money for the border. And by the way, we'll use it to process more illegal aliens. And they said, no, you can't use it for that. We want you to shut the border. So this is at an impasse right now. They might shut down the government over this in the coming days. But the point is, there's no money for Ukraine. As of now, there is no money for Ukraine. The European Union separately has not approved any new money for Ukraine because Hungary is exercising a veto power over that because the EU requires a unanimous vote. So Ukraine's not getting any new money from anywhere right now, and they're losing the war pretty badly. So so the question is, so where do you get the money? Well, maybe they can figure this out, but all of a sudden, Johnson and the White House, Mike Johnson, the White House, say, hey, we got $300 billion sitting right here in the banks. Let's just take it and spend it on Ukraine. If you do that,
yes,
you will destroy the US Treasury market. That is I described it as the reddest of red lines.
Does he realize that?
I don't think so. Maybe he will now. I mean, I've been talking about it. Others have been talking about it. Maybe somebody will tap on the shoulder and say, hey, Mr. Speaker, do you understand what you're doing here? But Janet Yellen, who's sort of, not that bright, kind of does what she's told. She's going along with the White House view of this. The Senate is for it, but they're all warmongers. Even the Republicans in the Senate are rhino warmongers, and of course the Democrats think it's a good idea. The House is divided, but look, Johnson just got elected Speaker. Who is he? He's a Louisiana congressman. Apparently, I haven't met him, but apparently very bright, a really well-respected constitutional scholar. I think he's done a lot of things right, so I kind of support him. But why should he be an international monetary expert? Why should he understand what we're talking about right now? He clearly doesn't. They just think it's free money. Hey, here's 300. They don't understand the implications. What country in the world would want to own a treasury security $1 worth if you think the U.S. will take it if they don't like what you're doing?